5-time World Series champion, World Series MVP, All-Star Game MVP, 14-time All-Star, 5-time Gold Glove, 5-time Silver Slugger, and just recently, Hall of Famer. But when you look at the people that are upset that he is not a unanimous Hall of Famer, it kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because is Derek Jeter better than Ken Griffey Jr.? No. Is he the best shortstop of all time? I would argue no, he's not. And you can look at the numbers for that. I mean, there's no denying that he was a great hitter for average. He was great at getting base hits. He has 3,400 career base hits, second all time, I believe, behind Pete Rose, who will never be in the Hall of Fame while he's alive also, unfortunately. But when you look deeper than the home run, batting average, hits, RBIs numbers, when you look at the sabermetrics, like WAR, which it measures wins above replacement player, so how many wins he'd be better than a guy who is a AAA player or a guy or a 4A player who kind of bounces between Major League and AAA. It's kind of shocking how average Jeter was for most of those years. I mean, when you look at early in his career, I mean, he was consistently in the MVP conversation. He finished third in the MVP in 98, sixth in 99. He was top 10 in 2000, 2000. So from 98 to 2001, he was in the top 10 in the MVP conversation. He finished top 10 in 2005, finished second in 2006, finished third in 2009, finished top 10 again in 2012, which we'll get to 2012 in a second because that's a very weird year for Derek Jeter. So, throughout the course of his career, I mean, and you hear people talk about Jeter, they say he's a great defensive baseball player. He's a great captain. He was the best player on the best teams. He was the captain on those Yankees teams for that entire time. But I'm not sure I would go as far to say that he was the best player on those Yankees teams. I think that is a huge overstatement to make in terms of Derek Jeter during his career. Because if you look in terms of WAR, at least, Derek Jeter only had 3 years during his entire Yankees career where he was considered the best player on those Yankees teams. I mean, it was 98, 99, and 2009 were the only years where he was considered by WAR to be the best player on those teams. I mean, Mussina, Posada, Giambi, A-Rod, Pettit, all guys that ranked about Bernie Williams, all guys that had better WAR years than he did. But he won World Series. He was the captain. He had clutch hits, and he had a couple plays defensively that you could look at and say, wow, this guy's a great defender. He's a great defensive shortstop. But especially on the defensive side, when you really dive into it, he has 5 gold gloves. Derek Jeter has 5 gold gloves. But for his entire career, his defensive WAR, which measures his defensive wins above replacement, weighted to his position. So you'll have more WAR if you're a very good defensive shortstop than you will if you're, say, a very good defensive first baseman. Because it's a harder position to play. In his entire career, he only has 3 seasons where he has a positive WAR. And only one of those seasons, in 2009, he won a gold glove in. And he was only 1.1 defensive wins above replacement. He won a gold glove in 2010 when he was just even defensive wins above replacement. The other years where he won a gold glove, he was negative 0.3, negative 0.7, negative 1.8, and negative 0.7. And for his entire career, he has a defensive WAR of negative 8.3, which puts him 4th to last in terms of all shortstops that played at least 10 years. So this whole thing about him being a great defensive player is kind of not correct, because he very clearly does not add anything to the... He has actually been far more than a positive and negative defensively for his career. But he made that one really cool play where he tossed it behind his back to get Jeremy Giambi out the plate. That was really cool. He's an average to bad defensive shortstop when you look at the numbers, when you look at something deeper than the highlights. His entire career, when you take total WAR, he only had 3 seasons where he was in the top 10 in the MLB in WAR. I mean, Mike Trout already has that. I would assume that Javi Baez probably will have more than that eventually. And the way WAR is broken down is that if you have a WAR of 8 or more, you're considered an MVP caliber player. When you have a WAR of 5 or more, you're considered an all-star caliber player. And when you have a WAR of 2 or more, you're considered a starter. In Derek Jeter's entire 20-year career, he only has 6 seasons with a WAR 5 or above. So, he has 14 all-star games, but if you go by WAR, only 6 of those were really deserving of an all-star appearance. And when you look in terms of MVPs, he does have one season in 1999 where they say he should have won the MVP with an 8.0 WAR. I mean, he won a Gold Glove in a year where he was almost 2 wins worse than a replacement player at his position. And then you get into the whole argument, is he the best defensive shortstop of all time? And you look at these other shortstop, and we're going to go to the stat JAWS, which I'll give you an explanation of. JAWS was developed by sabermetician Jay Jaffe as a means to measure a player's Hall of Fame worthiness. A player's JAWS is their career WAR, averaged with their 7-year peak WAR. The current Hall of Famers are then grouped by position, and position average JAWS is computed. So this is, in terms of their career, how good of a Hall of Fame rating they should have. So it takes their best 7 years of WAR, which doesn't have to be 7 years consecutively. It's just the best 7 years. And they average that out with their career WAR. And when you take that into account, Derek Jeter ranks 12th all the time. And of the guys ahead of him, there are everybody besides Bill Dalen, who played from 1891 to 1911 as a Hall of Famer. And the guys you have ahead of him, this is just grouped as shortstops. Hauneswager, Alex Rodriguez, Cal Ripken Jr., George Davis, Robin Yount, Arky Vaughan, Ernie Banks, Ozzie Smith, Luke Appling, and Alan Trammell all rank above Derek Jeter in JAWS, which really should be considered a definitive stat in terms of how pure of a Hall of Famer they are. Now, A-Rod's a guy. I could actually see A-Rod getting the Hall of Fame because of how much goodwill he's built up after he's retired. The steroid stuff is a big deal, but I could see the amount of goodwill he's built up, him getting in the Hall of Fame. But when you break it down, I'm just going to talk about the more the guys that were not playing in 1930. So that takes out Honus Wagner, that takes out George Davis, that takes out Arky Vaughan, that takes out Luke Appling. I'll take out Alan Trammell too, because he played in the early 80s. And he was the guy that got in on a senior vote. So we're talking A-Rod, Ernie Banks, Cal Ripken Jr., Robin Yount, Ozzie Smith, and Barry Larkin, who ranks right below Derek Jeter in terms of Hall of Fame. So Jeter in his career, out of all shortstops, ranks 12th in JAWS, 10th in WAR. He ranks 3rd in offensive WAR, just behind A-Rod and Wagner. So Derek Jeter was a very good offensive player. He, however, has the 4th worst defensive WAR. He ranks 8th in RBIs, 1st in hits, 6th in games played. And if you really want to get into, Derek Jeter wasn't a Hall of Fame or a home run hitter, but he does rank 6th all-time in home runs by a shortstop. So when you look at the guys we're going to talk about, A-Rod, Ernie Banks, Omar Vizquel, Cal Ripken Jr., Robin Yount, Ozzie Smith, Barry Larkin, Jeter's numbers don't really add up to those guys. I mean, he won World Series than they all did combined. But A-Rod, from 1996 to 03, he was a shortstop. In those years, he hit .311 with 340 home runs and had a defensive WAR of 9.3. That is almost a full 18 points better than... That's more than a full 18 points better than Derek Jeter was. He was a 3-time MVP in that span. Omar Vizquel, and during his career as a shortstop, has 11 gold gloves, hit .272, played shortstop for 24 years for a whole bunch of different teams. He's considered probably the best defensive shortstop of all time. Ernie Banks played shortstop for the Chicago Cubs from 1954 to 1961. Never went to a playoff game, which people are going to detract from him for. In that time span, he was a 2-time MVP. He hit .290 with 296 home runs. So in those 7 years, as opposed to, he hit more home runs than Jeter did in his entire 9-year career as a Yankee, as a shortstop. And Ernie Banks had a defensive WAR of 5.1 in those years. So even with less than that, he still has more wins above replacement, which is a cumulative stat, than Derek Jeter. Cal Ripken Jr. was primarily a shortstop from 1983 to 1996. He was a 2-time MVP. He hit .278 with 325 home runs and had a 33.1 defensive WAR. So he was immensely better than Derek Jeter was defensively. Robin Yount was a 2-time MVP. He had, when he was playing primary shortstop, he hit .320. So he had a better average than Derek Jeter did. He led the Milwaukee Brewers to the World Series, actually, in 1980. He's a 2-time MVP as well. Ozzie Smith, former Cardinals shortstop, former Padres shortstop, has a defensive WAR of .442, which is the best defensive WAR of all time for a shortstop. Barry Larkin has one MVP, has a defensive WAR of 14.4 and hit .295 for his career. Also won a World Series. Maybe. I don't know. I think he was on that Reds team that won the World Series. Let me look that up real quick. Yes, he won the 1990 World Series. 12-time All-Star, former MVP, 3-time Gold Glove, 9-time Silver Slugger. So all this talk about Derek Jeter being the best shortstop of all time, and he should have been 100% for the Hall of Fame. I can't believe he wasn't. I get it. I get why he wasn't 100%. I also don't think he's the best shortstop of all time. If I had to say the best shortstop of all time, I'd probably say Cal Ripken Jr. because he did it for longer. I would probably say Ozzie Smith number 2. He wasn't a great offensive player, but defensively, he's so head and shoulders above anybody else that's ever played the position. I'd probably slot Derek Jeter in right about number 3, just because he played shortstop longer than A-Rod and Ernie Banks did, and because he played baseball longer than Robin Yount did, and Barry Larkin. So Derek Jeter, overrated, and I'm not saying he's not a great player. He was without a doubt a great player. One of the top 15 players the last 20 years. Probably. I'd have to actually go in and look at that. But if I was ranking my top 5 shortstops, I'd go number 1, Cal Ripken Jr.